Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. And today we are going back to 2005.
To look at Hurricane Cindy,
Yeah.
a fascinating storm.
Yeah. And, speaking of looking back at things, I was just reading an article about
About what?
how much time people spend waiting at red lights.
Really?
Yeah, like 6 months of your life you spend waiting at a red light.
That's a long time.
It really is. It makes you think, what are we doing with all that time?
Right.
So anyways, I'm Hari.
I'm Kimi, and we're going to be diving deep today into Hurricane Cindy.
That's right. We've got some great sources for this one. We've got meteorological reports.
We've got news articles from back in 2005.
Exactly. And our mission is to, take all that information and really boil it down to the most interesting stuff
The most important step.
and present it to you guys, the listeners, in a way that's
In a way that's digestible.
right. That's not going to bore you to death.
That's right.
So should we start with the formation of Hurricane Cindy and how it kind of all began?
Sounds good to me.
All right. So Hurricane Cindy actually started out, as many hurricanes do, as a tropical wave.
Off the coast of Africa.
Right. Back on June 24th, 2005.
Yeah, and it just kind of sauntered across the Atlantic.
Didn't do much at first.
Not much happening, just kind of a little swirl of weather out there.
Just kind of existing.
Yeah, and then around June 28th, some thunderstorms started to form
Okay.
near the Lesser Antilles.
So it started to look a little bit more organized?
Yeah, like a little bit more. Maybe this is going to become something kind of a vibe.
Gotcha.
And so the National Hurricane Center, they were watching this and they're like, okay, we need to keep an eye on this thing.
And they put it in the tropical weather outlook.
Yeah, June 30th.
So officially on the radar at that point.
Officially, yeah, something to watch.
Right.
And then a couple of days later, it became Tropical Depression 3.
Oh, wow. So things are starting to ramp up here a little bit.
Yeah, it was just east of the Yucatán Peninsula in Mexico.
Okay.
And it made landfall, actually,
It did.
early on July 4th.
Oh, man. What a way to celebrate.
Yeah, no fireworks for them.
Right. But then it went back out into the Gulf, right?
It did, yeah, reemerged, went back into the Gulf of Mexico, and then it became Tropical Storm Cindy.
Officially named at that point.
Officially named, yep. And then it just kept getting stronger.
And it was heading toward the U.S. at that point.
Yeah, Louisiana was kind of in its sights at this point,
Mm-hmm.
and it actually became a Category 1 hurricane.
Wow. Okay. So it went from tropical depression to tropical storm to hurricane all in just a few days.
It did.
It's a pretty fast intensification, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It surprised a lot of people.
So what were the wind speeds like at that point?
75 miles an hour.
Okay. So a pretty strong category 1 then.
Yeah, definitely not something to mess around with.
So when did it actually make landfall in the U.S.?
July 6th, near Grand Isle, Louisiana.
Okay. And that was as a category 1.
Yeah, at its peak intensity.
And then did it make landfall again?
It did. It actually made landfall again as a tropical storm in Mississippi.
Oh.
Yeah, so 2 landfalls, and then it kept going.
And then it kind of merged with another system, right?
Yeah, so it became an extratropical cyclone on July 7th.
Okay. So it lost its tropical characteristics,
Exactly.
but it was still going strong.
It was still going, went across the southeastern U.S., and then back out into the Atlantic.
And it made landfall again?
It did, in Maine.
Maine.
Yeah.
Wow. Talk about a long journey.
Yeah, this thing really traveled. And finally, it dissipated up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence on July 13th.
Okay. So a full week and then some after it hit Louisiana.
Yep, it was a long-lasting storm.
And this was all in 2005, which was, wasn't that a really busy hurricane season?
It was, yeah. I mean, you had Katrina, Rita, Wilma.
Right. Those were the really big ones.
Huge storms.
But Cindy was actually the third named storm of that season.
Yeah, it got things going.
So it was just the beginning of a very long summer for a lot of people.
Yeah, it was a tough year for sure.
All right. So let's talk about the impact of Cindy. We know it was a category 1, but even category 1 hurricanes can obviously cause a lot of damage.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that really stands out with Cindy is the number of fatalities. 6 people died.
6. That's terrible.
Yeah, and all of them were because of car accidents.
Because of the storm.
Yeah, in Alabama, Georgia, Maryland. So the rain was really heavy.
And people were out driving, and it was just dangerous conditions.
Yeah, it doesn't take a whole lot of rain to make the roads really slick.
Right, especially if you're not used to driving in those kinds of conditions.
Right. And then, of course, you have the damage estimated at about $320 million.
Wow, that's a lot of money. And where was that damage concentrated? Was it mostly in Louisiana?
Most of it was in Louisiana, yeah. 5 parishes there were actually declared federal disaster areas.
Okay, so they got hit pretty hard.
They did.
And then the rainfall, you mentioned it was heavy. How much rain are we talking about?
Well, the peak rainfall was 9.5 inches.
Wow.
And that was in St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana.
That's a ton of rain.
It is, yeah. And even up in Vermont, they got some record rainfall from Cindy's remnants.
Really? That far north?
Yeah, over 2 inches in Montpelier.
Wow. So this storm really had a wide reach.
It did. It affected a lot of people.
And of course, we can't forget about the power outages.
Oh, yeah, there were a ton of those.
Yeah, especially in New Orleans.
278,000 people without power.
Wow, that's most of the city.
Pretty much, yeah. It was the biggest power outage they'd seen since Hurricane Betsy back in 1965.
Oh, wow. That's a long time.
It is, yeah.
So it really knocked them back in terms of infrastructure.
Absolutely.
And then, we always think about the wind and the rain, but with hurricanes, there's also the storm surge.
Right, you can't forget about that.
And what was the storm surge like with Cindy?
Well, the highest it got was 6.2 feet in Ocean Springs, Mississippi.
Okay, so that's pretty significant.
Yeah, enough to cause some serious flooding in coastal areas.
And I bet there was a lot of beach erosion, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And then, even though it was a relatively weak hurricane, it still disrupted a lot of things like transportation.
Oh, yeah, roads were closed. The Battleship Parkway in Mobile Bay was shut down.
Right, and they had to stop air and train service in New Orleans.
They did. They couldn't get anything in or out.
So even though it wasn't the strongest storm, it still had a pretty big impact.
Absolutely.
And, this isn't something that a lot of people might think about, but Cindy actually caused oil prices to go up.
Yeah, they went over $60 a barrel.
Because of the storm.
Yeah, there was a lot of disruption to oil production in the Gulf of Mexico.
Right, because that's where a lot of our oil comes from.
Exactly.
So it just shows you how far-reaching the effects of a hurricane can be.
Yeah, it's not just the immediate area that gets hit.
Right, it can ripple out and affect things all over the place.
That's right.
So we've talked about the wind, the rain, the storm surge, the economic impact.
But there's one more thing we got to talk about. What's that?
Tornadoes.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Cindy spawned a whole bunch of tornadoes, didn't it?
It did. 42 tornadoes across 6 states.
Wow. And what was the worst one?
There was an F2 that hit the Atlanta Motor Speedway in Georgia.
Oh, no. What happened?
It caused something like $70 million in damage.
Really?
Well.
To the speedway itself?
Yeah, and to some planes and helicopters at a nearby airport.
Oh, man, that's awful.
Yeah, they had to close the speedway for 2 months.
So it wasn't just a quick fix.
No, it was pretty bad.
And there was another F2 in North Carolina.
Yeah, that one destroyed a dairy barn.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, and some other buildings, too.
So a lot of agricultural damage there.
Yeah, and, the National Weather Service actually issued a record number of tornado warnings that day.
Really? How many?
67.
Wow. That's incredible.
It is.
And this is all because of Cindy, this one storm that started out as just a little tropical wave.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. It really is. And, there's one more tornado story I want to touch on because it's just so unusual.
What's that?
Well, there was a water spout that formed over Lake Hartwell in South Carolina, and it actually came ashore and turned into a tornado.
No way.
Yeah, it's pretty rare for that to happen.
It is.
But it just shows you how unpredictable these storms can be.
Yeah, they can really do some crazy things.
So we've talked about the immediate impact of Cindy, but there was also the aftermath, the recovery process.
Right, it's a whole other story.
And, 5 Louisiana parishes were declared federal disaster areas.
Yeah, so they got a lot of help from the government.
Which they definitely needed.
Yeah, and Energy, the power company, they had their second largest power outage ever.
Wow, that's saying something.
It is, yeah. And, what's really crazy is that a lot of the areas that got hit by Cindy also got hit by Dennis and Katrina later that same year.
Oh, man. Talk about a triple whammy.
It was a brutal hurricane season.
So they were just getting back on their feet from Cindy, and then, bam, another hurricane.
It's hard to imagine going through that.
It really is.
And, it's kind of interesting. Cindy was actually the first of 6 hurricanes that year to make landfall in the U.S. with hurricane-force winds.
So it was a pretty historic storm in a lot of ways.
It was, yeah. Even though it wasn't a major hurricane, it still had a huge impact.
And, you mentioned this earlier, but the fact that it was initially classified as a tropical storm and then later upgraded to a hurricane, that just shows how much we're still learning about these storms.
Yeah, our understanding of hurricanes is constantly evolving.
And, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left thinking about the cascading effects of these storms. How one storm can make a community more vulnerable to the next one.
Yeah, it's like a domino effect.
Exactly.
And it makes you wonder, What can we do to break that cycle?
Right. How can we build more resilient communities that can bounce back from these disasters?
And how can we better prepare for these events so that the impact isn't so severe?
Those are great questions. And, we don't have all the answers, but hopefully this deep dive has given you, the listener, something to think about.
Yeah, maybe it sparked some curiosity about hurricanes or about disaster preparedness.
Or maybe it's just made you appreciate the power of nature.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So until next time, I'm Hari.
And I'm Kimi.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Stay safe out there.
And keep learning.